Okay, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Network webinar series. Today we are joined by Desiree Van Dun. Welcome, Desiree, and thank you for your time today. And today, Desiree will be talking on the topic around observing and developing lean leadership at the Gemba, so very much walking the talk, which would be great. So just a little bit about the Enterprise Excellence Network. I can see there's some familiar names here and some from our network, which is great. So hello to all of you. But for those who don't know us, we are a network for European lean leaders based in Europe. And the network is led by Professor Peter Hines and very much focuses on key challenges within the lean world. So at the moment, we're doing stuff virtually and our workshop virtually, but we hope to get back to some sort of normality quite soon. So yes, I'm just going to hand over to Peter. If you'd like to find out more about the network, you can email myself. So my email address will be in the follow-up email after this webinar. So I'll just hand over to Peter now just to introduce Desiree a bit more. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks very much, Emma, and welcome along to everyone, whatever time of day you're with us. So this session we have Desiree Van Dun, who's joining us from the Netherlands. And Desiree made one really wise choice in her career about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, which was not to do her PhD with me, but to do it in Twente University over there in Holland. And at the time she was working in a consulting business, a house of performance, very much looking at the sort of people and behavioral side of lean, and then did her PhD at Twente, and then sort of never quite went away after that, and sort of leads a whole series of research. So actually in the last few months we've finally actually written something together, which is it's taken 12 years or something to do that, which is quite nice. So I think Desiree will run a very fascinating session on sort of the role of leaders and behavior, and I hope you enjoy it. So let me hand over.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to spend this hour with you and the people in the Enterprise Excellence Network. Indeed, Peter and I, we've met even more than 12 years ago, I think, in Cardiff at the Lean Enterprise Research Center at the time. And ever since, or even the years before, I really went on this lean leadership journey myself. And if I may, I would like to invite all the participants here today to join me on a Gemba walk, in fact. So even though we're not able to meet in person, unfortunately, due to the circumstances, I did want to bring the Gemba to you. And the purpose of that really is to help, or at least share my insights about how to observe as well as develop lean leadership at the Gemba. And that's something I will share more about today in this webinar. So, well, let's go to this Gemba. This is a picture of the shop floor at our National Mail Distribution Center, or at least we have several, and this picture is taken in one of them. This picture got shown to me in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. So it was quite a while ago. And at the time I was visiting the facilities of this distribution center, and this top manager proudly explained their lean journey so far. So they explained that they really transformed the work floor, introduced 5S, helped optimize the processes in place, and really were advancing in terms of their lean journey. So they were really proud in sharing this picture, and even told me, well, we've in fact won national prizes. So when I was there in that presentation, and I'm sure you've been in similar kinds of presentations yourself, I was very, well, first of all, I was very happy to hear their story, obviously, and I then took a better look at this picture. And if you allow me to explain what I saw, I think you can see that this picture exemplifies a really well-structured, organized process. It's clean, you have an overview, and there's clearly some standardization going on here. So it's a neat process. But if you look at it one more time, I'm sure you can also see there's something missing. Because in each of those different chairs that you see here, there should be people, right? At this moment, when the picture is taken, it's a great picture, but there's no value being added because there's no process flow going on. So all the mail is still waiting in those red boxes. Very organized, but not lean yet. So when I was in that presentation, I also sort of invited myself over to actually take a real look on the Gemba and to visit the team and to see how their interactions were going on, because I was very much interested already in 2007 to learn more about the human dynamics. And this picture, I think, exemplified for me, or was another driver, so to say, to learn more about that human dynamic, because I noticed that lots of organizations at the time, and even still today, are really focusing on that one pillar of lean, which is continuous improvement, process optimization. But we also know that there's this other pillar in lean, which is respect for people. And I think, or at least at the time, it was a starting point for me to see how those could be integrated in a more encompassive approach. So this was a good starting point for me to really, well, take a look at the shop floor. And here you see me a year later at Scania. It's a picture taken a long time ago. So this is me when I was walking the shop floor at Scania, one of the, well, I think you all know the manufacturer, a big one in Europe, producing trucks and already starting their lean journey many, many years ago. And at the time, I was following their workflow teams. I was even practicing, applying the standard operating procedure. So I was working on the truck manufacturing myself to really, well, know what was going on and to also observe in a more, spontaneous fashion what was going on in the shop floor in terms of human dynamics. And the key question in terms of my research and teaching and consulting in the past 15 years really has been, well, what makes effective lean leaders and their teams? What makes them effective? So that is the core question. Well, of course, I visited Scania, I visited this national mail distribution center, but there were many, many other companies that I was involved in the past 15 years to really see with my own eyes what was going on there. So then in terms of this webinar, I had to scope it a little bit, of course, because there's lots to tell, and I'm sure you also have a lot of questions, and I would like to make some time for that as well. So this webinar really focuses on three main questions. First of all, let's just start with the core. What are lean leader behaviors and values that actually drive high team performance, like real objective high team performance, because that's what I was looking at. Secondly, well, once we know about this basic fundament of lean leadership, how can you actually, you yourself, spot this leadership in your own workplace? And then thirdly, well, once you actually can see what it's like currently in your workplace, how can you then start to develop both your own, but also others' lean leadership? So these are the three core questions that I would like to touch upon today and share some inspiration regarding those. Let me then dive a little bit deeper in what I was doing on the Gemba, because I mean, as I told you, I've been observing those teams, I've been selecting really high performing teams and high performing leaders. But what did I then do? How do you observe beyond just what we can observe ourselves? So what we did is we pioneered, in fact, an innovative video-based behavioral analysis methodology. So what we did, we went to the work floor and we filmed regular daily meetings like startup meetings or weekly progress monitoring meetings of those shop floor lean teams. Plus, we also followed them around a methodology called video shadowing, really with the handycam, following them around in their daily work settings to see what kind of spontaneous interactions we could observe in the workplace, to see how leadership unfolds in those regular daily interactions. And once we had captured and recorded all these sessions, we then went into a second phase where we in a really minute by minute or second by second basis really analyzed what was going on during those filmed situations. So we were able to use a code book, and I'm going to show it to you later on, which really specifically identifies some micro behaviors that one could think of during those situations. Well, what kind of behaviors were we looking at in the first place, just to explore in a more open sense what kind of effective lean leadership behaviors are there if you observe them in real life. There are three categories we mainly looked at. So first of all, we had the more task-oriented behaviors, and the category task-oriented behaviors consist of things like sharing information or monitoring tasks within the team, sharing your vision about the future and the mission of the organization, but also things like structuring the meeting itself or the work being done. A second category concerned the relations-oriented behavior. So you could think of things like actively listening to the employees, agreeing with their ideas, asking for ideas also. So those are really focusing on, let's say, the social glue within the team. And then thirdly, we had a category of behaviors that is also important to think about and not to reject or dismiss in the first place. Those are counterproductive behaviors. Because no one is perfect, so we wanted to see if we could have a mutually exclusive and exhaustive list of behaviors to code every single behavior we observed in that meeting. So we, for instance, also counted how often leaders are engaging in disinterest, looking away, not paying attention, or even providing negative feedback. Those kinds of more behaviors that tend to temper people's interest to share ideas. So these were the behaviors we actually looked at. And, I think I've been talking for a while. So I actually have a question for you guys, those who are listening in here. And in this case, I would also like to ask Emma for some help, because the question basically is, and then I'm going to head over to Emma, is to see, to ask you to select, we have made a pre-selection of which behaviors do you think do effective lean leaders show during meetings? So which behaviors are most important to them? And perhaps, Emma, you could help us show the poll so people can vote.
Yeah, so I've just launched a poll. If you can please select your choice.
So, of course, I'm very much interested to hear later on what the outcomes are.
Okay, so we're just waiting for a few more to vote.
Of course.
Okay, so I think there's been a couple of, there's some have selected twice, which is why the percentages may be a bit off, but this gives you a good idea. So 21% voted informing, 6% voted task monitoring, 38% voted visioning, 79% active listening, and 12% agreeing.
12% agreeing, okay. I see a trend here. That's good. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's wonderful. So let me then reveal what we actually found. Thank you for already starting to think about this topic, because I think looking at the expectations you have, I had similar ideas when I started this journey. And then when I actually analyzed all those videos, and at the same time, I mean, I've been videoing and then analyzing all those lean leaders, right? We also use the same methodology to videotape and also observe otherwise effective leaders. So those who are not engaging in any kind of lean or TQM or operational excellence kind of strategies. So those who are not engaged in that. So we really were able to contrast and compare effective lean leaders with effective general type of leaders. And the interesting part is that we could actually see some significant differences, and that's typically a sign that there's something going on there. At a more general level, we saw that lean leader behaviors are typically more relations-oriented, although it must be said that they really like to balance their relations-oriented behaviors with more task-oriented behaviors, and this balancing over time becomes more and more important. But I'll talk a bit more about that later. So what did we actually find in this first study? This is a graph.
I think your slides aren't showing at the moment. I'm not sure if something's happened with your screen. I can just see the poll at the moment. You might need to close the poll.
Oh, I need to close the poll. Excuse me. How do I do that? I haven't practiced. Let's see. Because I don't see the poll. That's the point.
Right. Peter, can you still see Desiree's presentation or not?
No, I think maybe you need to close the poll, Emma.
Right, let me try this and then close it. Okay, I've closed it here.
Ah, it's still not closed. Do you want to try sharing your screen again, Desiree? Let's see if that works. Yeah,
there we
good.
Go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that worked. Thank you very much for the support. So
okay.
I will continue then. So as I was saying, we were contrasting effective lean leaders to non-lean but still effective leaders, and we could see some significant differences there. Here you see a graph, and on the left side or in the vertical edge, you can actually see the amount of or how often a certain behavior was being displayed during a meeting in percentage. And then we actually highlighted the 5 most significant differences between those lean leaders and non-lean leaders. And here we can see, and I think this really aligns well with your own expectations, that in terms of active listening, we see effective lean leaders do that way more often, significantly more often than otherwise effective leaders. So we actually saw them nodding, making eye contact, really paying attention, asking follow-up questions to their followers. And this sort of makes sense, right? So you need to have this connection to really understand what is going on in the shop floor and to steer up any improvements, suggestions in the teams themselves. Another point, and that is even more striking, I would say, is the fact that they tended to agree much more to their employees compared to otherwise effective leaders. So they're more positive in that sense in how they approach their employees. And if you then contrast this to some of the other outcomes, for instance, in terms of providing negative feedback, which is the 4th in the list, you can actually see that those lean leaders significantly do that less. So they rarely, sometimes they do it, but really to a minor extent. So if you combine these 2 outcomes, you can actually see that even though, I mean, I was doing some reflection myself, sometimes there's this idea where you think, okay, this has been suggested before, we've tried it, it's not gonna work. But these lean leaders, when I was observing them in real life, I actually saw that they were still positive about all these ideas and gave the floor to people to try them out and experiment and learn themselves. A third key point here is the task monitoring. And that is actually a counterintuitive kind of finding for me, because at first I thought, well, this task monitoring, unlike you, because you scored it quite low in the previous poll, which is good. At the beginning, I really thought, well, those leaders need to be on top of it, basically. They need to know how their team is doing. They are really much key performance indicator oriented. But the point was, because of course they were using visual management, but also because the team members themselves were adopting these kinds of behaviors, as will be shown later on, the need for those effective lean leaders to adopt task monitoring themselves, verifying the progress on certain indicators, reduced. So that's a kind of an interesting observation here, that indeed listening and agreeing, so a positive approach to employees is key, whereas the checking upon people behaviors were reduced. Now, to take it one step further, I didn't only look at the behaviors, I also checked the values that actually support these behaviors. So I asked people, so if you look at your leader, and also ask the leaders themselves, what kind of values does this person espouse? So what is the values, which values would you like to also transcend to the people you work with? And so supporting to, and I made a nice picture of those behaviors in a more general sense. So supportive of those behaviors are values that can be categorized or seen as focusing on self-transcendence and openness to change. And I'm going to show the specific outcomes here. So the values that, for instance, relate to openness to change are those that are focusing on continuous improvement, taking responsibility, so not just giving responsibility to people, but also holding them accountable for these tasks. So these leaders are really, in that sense, focused on improvement and change and experimentation. On the other hand, they also had in the mix their self-transcending kind of values, like being participatory oriented and focusing on teamwork, and at the same time also very much open-hearted. And this basically meant it was something they came up with themselves. It was something they explained to me as being open about what your own feelings are, and being open about your own insecurities even, and sharing something about your personal life. So that was kind of an interesting outcome, because I first thought, well, we're at work, so they focus on these tasks at hand, but they also really opened up and made sure that there was a safe learning environment for the people within. And this is all great to know, right? So it's great to see and know what are the actual important observable behaviors, evidence-based behaviors and values of those effective lean leaders. But why does it matter? I mean, it all sounds great. I think we all would have loved to have such a manager like this. But what is the purpose of doing that? What's the value here? And that marked really the next step in my research, and also in my teaching and consulting, is to then focus more on why is it important to develop this leadership, meaning really the performance of the work teams involved, so those that are being led by those leaders. So the idea was, and that's where we started first, a literature review and then some various different kinds of studies, that the idea was really that the leader behavior and value pattern enables the teams to perform well and continue also their high performance over time. And here you see, beyond the behaviors, which can be categorized as higher level leader support, they also, of course, had to provide more clarity and strategic clear strategic mission for their organization and the departments within. That is something that is really necessary for teams to excel and to flourish. At the same time, you of course also need to align the HR policy, make sure that all the profiles that you're looking for in terms of recruitment and promotion are well aligned. And at the same time, we also saw and noticed that those leader behaviors, not just about voicing or making sure that people know about the priorities and your support for lean. It's also about making it a reality and providing sufficient resources, and not just focusing on cost cutting, but really focusing on what is necessary for those teams to make the next step in terms of improving their performance. These behavior value patterns plus those actions that we see here on the left side, they actually inform and can also really steer up a mechanism within teams that can be seen as an ABC mechanism. Affective, behavioral, and more cognitive kind of factors that I will show up next. Because what we saw in the teams that were consistently high performing, I followed them for 3 consecutive years, and also was able to gather all the real key performance indicators that they were using themselves to see how that's actually really improved significantly over time. And we could then contrast those teams that remained highly performing and kept improving versus those that were not so that kept a similar performance level or even dropped their performance over time, kind of decay. And we could see that those affective states, but also behavioral processes and cognitive states made a difference. So in those really highly performing teams where the leaders were adopting these kinds of value behavior patterns that I just spoke about, we could see that the members then themselves started to follow up or mimic even their team leaders. So they started to share information themselves in the meetings that we observed. And they then started to do more task monitoring. Instead of the leaders having to do all that, they took responsibility for those self-managing kind of elements in their team. And you could also see that's some sort of an example of showing team leadership. So separate from the formal team leadership that exists in those lean teams, there's also the informal team leadership that could be seen within several, for instance, senior members in the team. And they were helping the other team members to follow up on this and actually follow their lead and yeah, become more steering and proactive in terms of their own team performance. And one of the key elements there as well was this cognitive element, the fact that they were really committed and also aligned and engaged with the organizational goals, which also then links back to the strategic and structural clarity that is one of the important preconditions here for them to make that commitment and follow up on it. Another thing that I didn't really expect from the start, but that really showed to make a difference in those highly performing teams, is that also they really nicely balance their more task-oriented behavioral processes with more relations-oriented affective states. So for instance, in this truck team that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, I could see some conflicts happening every now and then, and small micro conflicts, right? So there was some issue or different points of view in terms of how a work procedure had to be done or how it should be improved. And then the question is not, are they avoiding the conflict? No, in fact, it's actually good that they tackle the conflict at first, you know, so that they are proactive also in sharing any annoyances that they might have and share it and make sure that they solve and resolve those issues. So very practically in this case, it was a custom that if you had any issues, you would solve it by bringing a cup of coffee to the other one. So making sure that you still made the connection and were able to continue to work in a good pace. So here you see that, that also here for the team members themselves, it's important to make a certain balance. Now let me make a next step, because it's good, again, to know what the pattern looks like, what is needed in the shop floor. But then the question is, how do you really then develop it? And here I actually want to take a metaphor. And the metaphor is that of a cascade. And I'm sure you visited those cascades before, right? It looks beautiful. But in terms of a metaphor here, you can actually see 3 different layers here. Let me take a glass of water because I need that for now. So here you see 3 different layers. You have the higher level managers, the team leaders, and also the team members. And what we can see here is that by jointly learning, they can actually develop these patterns. So what we noticed is that the team members take over certain behaviors from the team leaders, and higher level leaders are visible on the work floor. So they're there, they're face-to-face in contact with the people there. So we see that there's an arrow, not just through the team leaders to the team members, but also directly from the higher level managers to the team members, but also vice versa. So the team members and what they do on the work floor really informs the higher level managers to learn about what is necessary and what kind of resources they should install in the shop floor. And this is what we call, and also sort of coined in our latest paper, as joint learning by doing on the Gemba. So here you see that once the team members interact with their leaders in different levels, they start to learn and they start to improve. Now the question on is, what can you do? You know, what can you install to make this work in your organization? Now I think you can know about a certain level of activities that you are involved in. So first of all, I think it's important that Gemba walks are really a routine for all hierarchical levels in the organization. So not just the team leaders, but also those higher ups. Secondly, it's also important to sort of develop a real clear and comprehensive leadership profile. So for recruitment, selection, training, and promotion. And another thing is that the training should not per se be done in different separate rooms, but really on the job. So to see and observe your leaders in real life, to see how they can adjust their micro behaviors, because it's typically those similar small situations that matter. And also, of course, constructive feedback and peer coaching can help. We noticed that this video observation method really provided great feedback to those people involved, and they learned a great deal of it. And finally, I think at the organizational level, it's also important to consider how leaders themselves can create a lot of waste. So for instance, in terms of non-decision making, or their decision making that counteracts any bottom-up initiatives, but also bureaucracy and power games. Then comes the most important part, I would say, and this is something I typically do in many different kinds of trainings I'm involved in, also in our university, but also as a consultant. And the question is, how can you really adopt this at the individual level? And I think that it really aligns well with a lot of methodologies we've spoken about before in different other webinars. So the Toyota Kata or other kinds of cyclical kind of approaches. And this is my take on it. So I think the starting point is not what do you need, but the question is, what does your team need? And making small step improvements and celebrating the success are key here. So I think once you've taken a look at this cycle, there are different steps of gathering information about what your team needs, and then also selecting some key points, small points for improvement that you yourself can work on in terms of your own leadership or in terms of leadership of others. And by learning and experimenting, you can then really evaluate and learn about your own learning by doing, basically. So it's a cycle again, and I think that we tend to always make big plans for change in terms of our own leadership, but I think it comes down to those micro interactions in the workplace, and that is where we can really make a difference. So as I mentioned, the starting point really is not you. I think that's also one of my core messages here. It's not you, it's about your team and what do they need and what does that tell you about your own leadership style. And I think therefore, and that's also my final question here, the question is, well, what does your team need, right? Is there something, if you look at this slide, is there something, if you think of your own team that you lead or you're part of, what do they need to develop? How can they improve and make a next step towards higher performance? And I think that is the key question here. So my question also to you is, also to make it a bit more practical before we close off, perhaps I'd like to ask you to fill in the chat, is there one point your team can really improve upon? So I think we can use the chat function for now to see if there's anything you can think of that your team could really make a step in.
Thanks, Desiree. So yeah, if you could fill in any answers you have to that question in either the chat box or the question box, and then I can read those out to Desiree. Thank you.
And this always requires some kind of reflection, some consideration. What do you think is really key here in your team?
Whilst we're waiting for those, Desiree, we did have a question during your presentation from Carlos, who said, can we say that the enabling elements, so the higher level support, strategic and structural clarity, etc., causes the lean culture, or is it the other way around, the promotion of a lean culture, which brings the enabling factors to happen in the organization?
That's an excellent question, and I want to congratulate you with that, because indeed it's, I think, in a more empirical way, these arrows could also be the other way around. And I also on purpose drew the cycle as a cycle and not as separate elements, because they reinforce one another. It's you cannot score an A on each of those different elements. You really have to. It's a continuous process and it moves forward. And in this sense, I think that there could be some interaction. So what I'm sketching here are teams that have really advanced, right? So they really have the support. And they need that support as well. But the point is that, of course, there's a feedback loop. So that is also something we sort of sketch in our latest paper. That's indeed when those higher level leaders observe that the team is doing well, is performing well, they can then adjust their own approach and perhaps strengthen the lean approach in their strategy, their HR, or even adjust the resources that are provided to the teams. So there's definitely a feedback loop.
Perhaps I'll come back in, Desiree. There's 4 responses, so I'll read them out. So the first one from Eric is team cohesion. Do you want to comment, or should I just read them all out? Or... Well,
of course, I'd like to hear a little bit more later, but first read them out and then perhaps I can comment in more general.
So the second one from Mark is senior management support and engagement. And then Andy has to have the hunger from the team to wish to embed continuous improvement into our wider organization, not just the team, but everyone. And Robert has go, look, see, understand. And Elizabeth has cognitive states.
Yeah.
Actually, there's more coming in. Should I just keep going, or do you want to pause?
I think it's good. I will first comment on these first bits. Okay. Thank you very much, because indeed this also shows that every team, and that's perhaps one of my other messages here, every team has a different starting point, has a different status at this moment. So this means that at every single point in time, even if you're really advanced, you can always adjust minor bits and pieces here. So what I do notice when you read them out loud, Peter, is that people refer to different parts in the element or in this model. One important point here is the senior management support. Some question I always get asked is, what if there's none? You know, what do we do? How can we move it forward? Or if it's reducing over time. And I think it's always a matter of going back to your main strategy. It might be that leaders may find it scary to make a change towards more relations-oriented behavioral style. But the point really is, in general, do you find support from other leaders as well? Is it still a strategic priority? And also, how can you help those senior members to see what is the value of what you're doing in the work floor? So I think it's really a matter of inviting them over and show them what's going on, and also show what's the value for the customers you work with. I know it's perhaps a little bit oversimplified, but I think this is really the bottom line, or the foundation where we all build our own development on, to really go and make a connection instead of assuming people are not supportive.
Okay, let me give you a few more. So Elizabeth says cognitive states because senior management have not yet committed.
Okay. Yeah.
Jerome says my team's (software development) needs to coordinate a lot of efforts with other teams to get the work done, sharing knowledge and collaboration in decision making. What they need from me is to make this possible. Urgent. Okay.
So they need to be supported in that sense.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
make that happen.
And then Una says, not sure where the poll is. Empower your team. Oh, she was thinking there was a poll on this there. Yeah, it's just in the chat box here, Una. Yeah. So you're fine. So empower your team. Sharon says, and make sure there is a shared sense of priority and urgency. He also says, what should I focus on more? So asking the team, what help do they need, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I typically tend to do when I'm in a face-to-face session, and perhaps I can even provide it here to the participants, is there's this self-assessment tool that I created and also published as part of my PhD dissertation several years ago. And it basically is a self-assessment tool that you can use and fill out for the teams that you are having in mind right now to see how they score on each of those different elements in this circle. And of course, you could also ask others to reflect on those similar points, because I think the point that the previous colleague made was a really good one. I mean, this is still your assumption of how things are going, right? How are the people perceiving it themselves? And if you go to the shop floor, how can you actually see some evidence of all these different processes here? And I think this more objective, making it more objective or asking for more insight from different perspectives is super helpful here. So that's a good advice.
Okay, there's no more points, so
If there are any questions, I don't know if there's anything that I haven't touched upon yet, or any questions that
okay, so should we just open it for general questions?
Yeah.
So I'll leave the box open just for now. So in the meantime, let me ask one that I've always, since I first read the paper like years ago on on the behaviors, the one thing that's sort of been in my mind is the I perhaps have a slightly different definition of the word behavior. So in my mind, I think more of active behaviors rather than passive behaviors. So you might say active listening is actually more passive than active, if you see what I mean. In other words, you're not doing anything, you're taking stuff in. So in my mind, I always thought about it's part of the behavior. The behavior is acting upon the listening, and that the behavior is the acting. So what were the sort of things that these people that were actively listening, what sort of did they do as a result of it?
How could we observe that? And also, what did they do as a result? So first of all, how did we observe that? We really took organizational behavior literature to really specify this. But of course, you can only see so much of someone's listening behavior, right? Because you never ever know what they're thinking of at the same time. You can only see whether they're first of all making an eye contact at the same time, whether they are nodding their head or making some facial gestures that show that they're really engaged, as well as asking some follow-up questions. So that is how we measured it. Right. Then in terms of the next part of your question, so it's more of an observable approach, behavioral approach to this active listening, which could also be considered a more cognitive outcome of what people are doing. And then in terms of what they were doing next is typically it was, for instance, agree with what others were saying, or they were taking action upon what they had heard. So for instance, one of the things during those meetings that happened was people were sharing their experiences when they were they followed one another for a day. It was one of the points that the middle manager raised and suggested so that the leaders could learn from one another. And there were some points for improvement that they found. And this was something they then worked on. And the middle manager involved, the one we followed at the time, was taking further actions on to see how can we reduce this issue here and make sure that it won't happen again. So I think it's really about freeing up resources for people to follow up on their ideas, and also positively confirming their observations oftentimes, or sharpening them by asking for ideas to then see how improvements can be made.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. So first one is from Elizabeth, who I think sort of, I read behind this question advice for her own research. But anyway, so she says, in your Scania research study, what outside stakeholders did you get on board, and were the senior management present to transform the culture?
Yeah, I think especially in the Scania example, I still recall almost every moment I was there, because it's it was really inspirational. There was on a daily basis, you could see multiple levels of leadership visiting the work floor, and that was even part of their own standard operating procedures, or their leader standard work, I should say. So they really installed this system where every layer of leadership was on the ground floor on a daily basis. For instance, doing examinations together with the work floor people to see how their standard operating procedures were working or not, or how they could have been improved. So that was a system that we observed there, and that was different in many other organizations. So they didn't have this sophisticated system where leaders were really there almost all the time. So and that was actually a key point for them to instill that, to make sure that this cultural transformation could take place. Because in those organizations, the contrasting ones that did not keep up their high performance, it was apparent that those higher level leaders were really absent. And when they were there, people were asking, what is he doing here? He never visits us, so is he checking up on us? So they really made such such statements while I was there within their team. So they were very open to me, in fact, about all these considerations. So I think their face-to-face, well, I'm not sure if daily is always possible, not in all organizations, but very regular, highly regular visibility and accessibility of those leaders, higher level leaders, is key. I think there was a second part of the question, but I'm not sure if I...
Well, the second part, and were senior managers present to transform the culture, which probably you've covered, I think. So
I think, yeah. So yeah,
okay, let's move on to the next one from Simon, who says, we work in a team of teams type environment. And which of the behaviors and states are most beneficial in that situation?
So a team of team.
I guess he sort of means a sort of Scrum at scale or that type of environment.
Yeah. So in fact, recently I engaged more in agile team research, where we in fact also do this video observation and even measure people's arousal, physical arousal during meetings. So I've been looking into this agile development myself as well. So of course this method or this model was developed in shop floor work teams that are, present on a daily basis in their own work team. In terms of virtual teams, right? That's an interesting question. How can you then transcend this to a virtual setting? I think, the team elements that you see here are still similar. We even did a large literature review on agile teams, scaled agile teams recently with one of my PhD students, and she found really similar behaviors, affective states, and cognitive states as in this study. But one thing she added really to the enabling side was the high-tech tools that they were adopting to facilitate conflict management and information sharing, and to have a more smooth transfer of knowledge and insights, and also the social part of it. So I think there are a few elements missing here to really translate this model to a virtual setting where people work in different geographical locations. But especially this high-tech support and also clear rules in terms of responsibilities can also be helpful there. That's at least what we found in our most recent agile team literature review that we performed recently. But I'm not sure if that's really the direction that that we had to take in terms of answering the questions. I'm not sure if that answers the question you just pointed out.
Okay, well, we'll assume so. If not, Simon, come back and post something else. So here, I think you have a fan here. So this is Jeroen, who says, Desiree, we're lucky to have you as a thought leader in Lean. Very nice.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for the webinar. What do you consider to be the new frontiers in Lean? For instance, the further integration of AI with shop floor activities. What's your take on this? Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for the question and the compliment. That's nice. I think the fact that you're all here shows that it's indeed an important topic, and I'm still learning. One thing that I'm recently more involved in is indeed those elements that relate to Industry 4.0, so AI or cyber physical systems, those kinds of things. So oftentimes a paper was published 2 years ago by me and the professor from Brazil, focusing on Industry 4.0 adoption and how it then impacts the already existing Lean implementation ongoing in those organizations. And we noticed that especially certain process-related Industry 4.0 tools, optimizing the process, can help and to elevate the outcomes of for instance, flow within a lean system. The point then is, and that is my follow-up research that I will present this Tuesday at the Euroma conference, has to do with, well, the human side of it again, right? So if we're adopting the smart industry kind of technologies into our lean methodology, which definitely will help us to optimize and improve our process efficiency, the question then is, how does this come across with the people? How does this relate to the respect for people side of lean? And how can we make sure that people can still add value in their own way to the company's business, and especially in this case, of course, to the customers? So there's a it can be difficult. It can become difficult, let's say, to make that story and also consistently implement it, because there's always this, especially if we see what can be earned from adopting, or it's a big investment, but once it's invested and you implement it, there's lots of optimization going on. But then the question is, how do you deal with the people? Do you have a clear strategic vision for them as well, and how they can still add value? Or are you going to be very honest, which I think would be my suggestion, with the fact that, well, we have to let go a few people, but this is why we're doing it, and this is because our customers will really benefit from it. So I think you should always be honest about these kinds of things, and once you try to hide it, people will sense it for sure. And that's also what I noticed in the organizations I observed.
Mm. I just got a comment on that as well, Jerome, that like Desiree, we have been doing a little bit of work of integration of lean and so forth, and one of the areas is the Industry 4.0, and AI being one of those areas. And what I've generally found is that most of the Industry 4.0 has been done by technology experts, either computer technology or engineering or a combination, etc. And really the problem with it is that they've taken a very, very technical and very, very unhuman approach. So they've gone so far away from even the human side that we have in lean. And that actually when we've been doing some courses on this, and we found that we needed to actually explicitly on a course integrating lean and 4.0 really put a third of the course on the people side, because the technology people just really haven't grasped that at all. And that's partly perhaps because of how they think and how they've educated and just how their brains work, that they don't think of the people aspects at all. So we've almost got to the conclusion that you need to bring lean and Industry 4 and probably HR, if not even psychology, together to actually get the best solution. That was what some of our own findings.
Yeah, if I may jump in here and also support it, I think we're talking about artificial intelligence, right? And really making smart industry. But I think we're missing out something here. We need another part of intelligence, which is emotional intelligence, something also coined by Daniel Goleman some 20 years ago. So in my recent study, I'm actually studying how the emotional intelligence of leaders at different levels in the organization, including also the emotional intelligence of the workers themselves, can help support this transformation process in organizations. Because indeed, if we only let the tech guys work on it, then we're definitely missing a big part, which is essential for the actual transformation. Of course, you can always push for transformation here, you can always implement those technologies, but people will not use them as such, or not to the right extent, I think, when they're not on board. So you really need that emotional intelligence, being aware of the sensitive part of this whole process, people's insecurities about their jobs, for instance, to actually help them see the relevance and importance of these things. And I think if you balance this, I think again it's a matter of balancing task and relations-oriented mindsets here. I think that's a key element. It's still conceptual, right? But I think the research and the empirical evidence we find is that indeed in those organizations that have this emotional intelligence level in place in their leaders and members, you can see there's a smoother transition towards adopting Industry 4.0, and people are even proud of it. And I think that's the thing you want to establish here.
Okay, good. So Simon has come back, says, yes, you've covered it. He also puts a reference to the team of teams, which is something from Mihan Yonka. So you can follow up on that one later, perhaps.
Excellent, thank you.
So one from Andy here. I've always thought of Gemba walks should be exercised at the board's senior meetings. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think, what is a Gemba, right? The Gemba is not just a shop floor, it's the place where the work gets done. And it could be in many different places, so and where the value adding is done. And sometimes, and that's also why I suggested at the organizational level to also look at your own managerial waste, is sometimes indeed the top manager's boardroom is the Gemba where things need to be improved, because what a lot of their decisions or the way they make decisions can really hamper or enable and accelerate transformation in the organization. So I think indeed, and that's why we're still learning more and more about what is the Gemba, but I think lean leadership, and therefore also I took these multi-layered approach and viewpoint in terms of lean leadership. It's not just at the shop floor. I think that's a misunderstanding. It's really in all layers, and also higher level leaders, including top managers, should be involved for this system to make that cultural transformation. So that's kind of a difficult answer, right? Because it's a big challenge to allow that to happen. But once the top managers learn from the shop floor in their own shop floor Gemba walks that, hey, this regular reflection helps them to improve, perhaps someone can say, well, what about you? How can you make that step? You know, of course, in a polite and nice way, but I think that reflecting on that and seeing how they can change something in their own behavior is something that happens at a certain point of time when they are engaged in regular Gemba walks.
Yes, exactly. Actually, Carlos's question sort of follows on from that, which is, we tend to associate terms like Gemba to manufacturing operations, but I'd wondered same human behaviors being demonstrated at the C-suite level, or have you seen different dynamics coming up at this level where dimensions such as corporate politics, peer pressure, narcissist attitudes may play roles?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So personally, I really focus mainly on the work floor team level and their different higher level leaders. And I did not yet, although that's really on my wish list, I didn't do such a video observations study in the boardroom. However, a colleague of mine did this with CIOs, so Chief Information Officers. She's still working on the results, so I'm not sure what are the outcomes at this point in time. So we're really experimenting with this this approach also in the boardroom. And in fact, we're using the same behavioral coding scheme that I showed earlier today. So this could be a great opportunity to really compare and contrast to what extent there are similar behavioral patterns, because those are all human behaviors, so everyone can adopt them. But the question is, are there different patterns involved in effectiveness in those teams?
Yeah. So there's one question from Robert who's actually left, but I'll give you the question anyway. So he's interested in the reference for the Lean Industry 4 paper from 2019, or whether you could share the paper itself and we could just forward it to people.
Yes, for sure. It's open access, so yeah, that's possible.
So I think the plan is that we can share your slides. Is that right? And if you can send that paper as well, we can post those round to those of you interested and so forth.
Of course.
We've come to the end of questions. I've just got one thought that I've been doing in my own thinking is, traditional management we think of top down from the company to the teams and so forth, command and control. And lean obviously and agile, in fact, we've tried to move away from that to at least a reasonable degree, and obviously agile being the team as the focus rather than the senior managers and so forth, and not the hierarchy and so forth. But I'm beginning to wonder, we may even need to go a stage further than the team being the focus of attention. because a team is based of a whole group of people who might have completely different interests, roles, motivations, and so forth. So if we say, well, what does the team want? Actually, it's not a simple question, because each individual might have a completely different set of requirements. And I'm wondering if we should start with what does the individual need or want rather than the team. So anyway, I've just thrown out as an open question.
That's a fascinating thought. So I think, of course, we start from the individual level where we observe this individual level behavior. In essence, I mean, a team is a collection of individuals that want to establish a certain shared goal, right? And all these different individuals need to be committed and need to be able to share information. It should not be scattered around in a team. Everybody should have a certain basic level there. So, and also the important point here is that people themselves need to feel they can flourish in the team. So indeed, perhaps a more individual level focus for follow-up studies, but also in your own lean transformation approach is relevant, because, well, that's also the reason why I'm centralizing here or centering on these lean teams, is that in fact they are your internal customers, and that includes the individuals. So I think as a manager you should really think of them, and then of course also they can perform well and create customer value for the end customers.
Great, thank you very much. That's an interesting thought there. So we're sort of up with our hour period. So I've certainly enjoyed the session myself, and I hope everyone else. We just go on from Simon coming in. I'd come back to the hierarchy of needs in that situation. So we need, as leaders, to ensure that the lower levels needs are covered to ensure that social interactions can be effective. I think it was more a comment than the question, but
yeah, agreed. Good
yeah.
point. Thank you, Simon. That's a nice enrichment of the discussion.
Okay, yes, he says a comment. Okay, good. Well, let's wind things up there. So on your behalf, I'd like to thank Desiree for her presentation and the thought-provokingness of it, and obviously some nice questions from the audience as well. So thank you very much for that. I'll just hand over to Emma to close us down for the day.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much, Desiree. And thank you for those who have attended. So you'll receive a follow-up email from myself with some feedback, which is always great. And if you would like the slides, just email myself and I can send them across to you. And we hope to see you again at our future webinars. So thank you, Desiree. Thanks once again. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.